I'm going to be talking about Finn Origins today. Now, apologies to any fans of this comic who happen to stumble upon this video because I am reviewing this as a complete newbie. I knew nothing about this until a coworker lent me his copy, and I am just giving off my first impressions as somebody who knows nothing about this character or its history. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing aside from what I've learned on Wikipedia. But let me start at the beginning. Scottish coworker of mine. I'm currently living and working in Vietnam, and in the staff room at the school where I work at, teachers are from all over the world. So I have a Scottish coworker who just got back from a trip home and brought with him several comic books back from Britain. And he had this one, and he asked me if I'd be interested in reading it. And I said, well, I know nothing about it, but why not? Comic books, if somebody offers to lend me a comic book, I always say yes because they're so quick and easy to read. I mean, the amount of time you're committing yourself to is very minimal, and you never know. You might find something interesting, and either way, I'd get something to talk about on this BookTube channel. So I went ahead and said yes, but I knew nothing about this. There was some discussion in the staff room with some of the other British people there. And I guess this comic book was published by the 2000 AD company, which is the company that I guess is most famous for the Judge Dredd comics, which of course have been made into movies a couple of times. But they're a British-based comic. I don't think they're popular in the US, although I should always be careful because I tend to be rather provincial in my pronouncements. I assume sometimes because I didn't read something, then nobody else read it either. I don't know. People who live in America, has anyone heard of Finn or any of these comics? Anyways, a British comic published in the 90s by 2000 AD, which is a British company whose most famous character is Judge Dredd. Although I was asking around if there was some sort of interconnected universe like there is with the DC and Marvel comics, and apparently there's not. So Finn does not do any crossovers with Judge Dredd. They're in separate universes, apparently, but the same comic book company. Although Finn does come from another comic, Third World War, which was a previous comic book in which Finn and other characters were in there. And again, I don't really know anything about this, but Wikipedia does have an article on Third World War in which they give the plot summary and talk about how the character Finn emerged in that comic, etc. But then I guess after Third World War came to an end, then Finn had his own comic. Now, there's no page numbers in this edition, but the comics seem to be very short. So I'm assuming that each time the title flashes across the banner, it's a new issue. So the individual segments are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages. So it must have been placed in the back of another collection. I think Wikipedia confirms that. But they are an ongoing story. So the next story picks up exactly where the next one left off. So what is the story here? Well, Finn is he's a deserter from the Northern Irish Army, I believe. So, Finn, good Irish name, except apparently his real name is Paul, and Finn is just the name they gave him. So, whatever. I think he started off, his backstory is that he started off apolitical, but he gets recruited to this New Age witch eco-terrorist coven. And because he's ex-military, He was a military deserter. They use him as his muscle. And according to what I've been able to gather on Wikipedia, in the original series, Third World War, they were just fighting against evil corporations. But with the advent of Finn's own series, I believe there was a bit of a retcon or a plot change. Somebody correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but I believe this was new with Finn's comic. With Finn's solo comic, is that now the evil corporations are controlled by aliens. So there's two levels. There's the Shining Ones, who are humans which have been granted power from these aliens. The aliens are known as the Newts. And the humans tend to be in charge of running these evil corporations that do all sorts of things like pollute and don't do the necessary safety upgrades on automobiles and all the usual nasty stuff that big corporations are always up to. But then there's the Newts themselves, and as Finn kills enough of the Shining Ones, he eventually attracts the attention of the Newts themselves, which are these, as the name implies, some sort of lizard-like being from another planet who have these powers from this seeing eye, these sort of godlike powers. There's it's not 100% spelled out in the text, but I think it's heavily implied that these godlike beings are are the same creatures which were the deity in the Old Testament. So it's similar to Philip Pullman's trilogy, The Golden Compass, when we find out that the God of the Old Testament was just a celestial being among many who set himself up as this cruel dictator. It seems to be a similar thing going on here. And in fact, there are lots of references to the Old Testament throughout, as is stated right here on the author's preface, aspects of the Old Testament. In fact, very early on in the pages, we get an inversion of the story of Job, where the godlike beings are making one of their servants suffer, kill his family, give him a horrible disease, just simply to test his loyalty and prove a point that these humans will never revolt no matter what you do to them. So whereas in the story of Job's putting up with that suffering and not cursing God is looked upon as a virtue. And here it's just emphasizing how servile and slavish the human population is to these cruel gods. The initial stories where Finn is just attacking one shining one after another struck me as uninspired. I was able to read them easily enough because they were comic books, but I didn't feel like there was any magic or mystery holding me to these stories. And I actually tried to tease out from my Scottish friend what he found so appealing about these stories, and he told me, I just think they're funny. And indeed, there is a dark humor moving all through this. It's an understated humor. I guess perhaps that's the British thing, huh? Kind of an ironic humor. It's not obvious punchlines, but there is kind of a dark humor sense going all through this. As you move more and more into the comics, though, further and further into the volume, the monsters become a lot more Lovecraftian in nature. And here, I think, is where the comic book comes into its own. And these are the kind of things that are maybe best suited to the comic book medium. I mean, you could describe all this stuff in written prose. I guess Lovecraft did. I should state, actually, I'm only familiar with Lovecraft by reputation. I've not actually read any of his books. But it would be more difficult, and it would require some effort on the reader to visualize. In a comic book, it's much more easy to depict this kind of strange world they've got on. So they've got this idea where there's these sea monsters, and under the sea, there's this kind of black hole where there's this, I guess, outer space has invaded the depths of the sea, and that's how these creatures are traveling. And Finn eventually gets captured and put into prison, where a dimension opens up in the prison wall and the ocean comes in. And then once he goes in, he's in the depths of the ocean, where he should get crushed by the pressure. But as he says, between the vacuum of space around Norisan, that's the name of this newt, this kind of celestial god from another planet, and the crushing pressure of the water on the ocean's floor, there was a no man's land. So he's at the bottom of the ocean. Here's the crushing pressure, and here's the vacuum of space, because there's a pocket of outer space now in the bottom of the ocean, and he's just suspended in this no man's land. I have the feeling that if this was described simply in prose, I might have a little trouble following what's going on. Maybe that's just me. I typically have trouble following what's going on in these kind of weird science fiction books. But here in visual form, I'm able to understand it perfectly, and I'm able to follow these rather bizarre concepts. And so I think the freedom that the comic book writers and illustrators give themselves to explore these kind of bizarre concepts and worlds in the form of in the medium of having stuff visually represented, which would be cumbersome to describe otherwise, lends itself to some creative storytelling. And there is some creative storytelling in here. There's also, maybe in my opinion, some uninspired storytelling. So, for example, when early on in the book, when Finn is just destroying a bunch of soldiers, these scenes here. Let me see. They didn't grab me. I don't know. Soldiers, machine gun fires, they're dead. Finn goes on to the next group. More machine guns firing. These segments I found just a little bit boring, and I think these do maybe more predominate in the first half of the book, but it does get much more interesting in the second half of the book. And by the time I got to the end of it, I'm not sure if I quite know what to make of it, but I was glad I read it. There was enough interesting things in here to divert the mind and excite the imagination that I was glad I had picked this up. Now, the book, interestingly enough, on the cover, there is nothing. No words or anything here. But Finn Origins is on the, what would you call this, the spine. It's also on the cover page. Now, for much of the book, the title is a misnomer because we start off with Finn already as an established character. And again, apparently he came from this previous series, Third World War. But after that storyline finishes, then we do get to Finn's origin story. So he's talking to a new recruit. He flashes back in time and gives his whole origin story here. So yeah, we do get his origin. It would be interesting to read Third World War and see how these connect together. Or maybe read Third World War first and then go into Finn, assuming that Third World War is in a collected edition. But that's not the book I have. You know, I'm out here in Vietnam. I just take what I can find. And this was the book that my coworker happened to have and that he graciously lent to me. So this is the book I read. And that's all I have to say. If if you're a fan of this series, or if you're British, or if you know anything about these comics, and you can add in some extra information or anything, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts in the comments. But that's all I've got.